I know it feels a little jarring for you to move from ribosomes to issues of women into STEM. However, in order to smooth the path, I'm going to offer a segue, okay? Did you see the pictures that Rachel put up there of the women who are working in her area? And there was a picture of all the women who were working in her area, and at the bottom there was this, on the far right, whatever it is, was a picture of a woman by the name of Tracy Johnson. So I know Tracy Johnson. I have known Tracy Johnson for a long time because Tracy was a postdoc at Caltech, and I am a trustee at Caltech. And so I met Tracy, and I saw her as being a person who was incredibly talented. And I kind of warned her not to get sucked into the work that drove her and any person from an underrepresented group to want to do something about people from underrepresented groups. You know, you basically say, go and get tenure and then call me. Because quite frankly, it's very easy to get pulled into these because the issues about how I got here and what do I do about the others who were just as talented who did not get here is something that burns in all of us every single day, okay? So I went online and I found this, she was interviewed for a publication for ASBMB. And the interviewer said, what advice would you give to young persons from underrepresented backgrounds who want to pursue a career in science similar to yours? And Tracy answered, there are inevitably times when being the only one or one of a few can be very isolating. Being from an underrepresented background in the sciences, that is being a woman, a person with disabilities, an underrepresented minority, etc., can present unique challenges, but it can also bring enormous opportunities. If science is your passion, embrace the opportunities. For example, as a Black female scientist, I find that people are likely to remember if I've given a talk at a meeting. So it makes it easier to meet new colleagues and develop collaborations. There is also a large body of data that shows that scientists who come from non-traditional backgrounds bring a different perspective to their research. It is important to know how your unique background positively influences the way you think about your science or carry out your research, and embrace it. Now, I think that this begins to help you understand that when people like us who are kind of carrying all of these factors that don't look like the people who we normally see in the sciences, that it is disruptive, but that in fact, this whole question about how do we begin to really move people in so that they can just be concerned about their science and not have to always be concerned about being the only one of wherever they have gone. And I have been the only one in so many places we won't even talk about it. And that is in part because I started this journey a long time ago. I'm 73. So I started this journey a long time ago. And as an African-American woman into the sciences in the 1960s and 70s, let me tell you, it was easy to be the only one. Okay, really easy to be the only one of whatever it is that you want to talk about. And I started it from a really difficult place. That is, I'm a post-Sputnik kid, all right? But I started this journey from Birmingham, Alabama. And if you want to talk about stress and other kinds of things, we can have a discussion about Birmingham. But the reason that I want to tell you just that little bit is because you need to understand that talent is sitting all over the place. And the question is how, in fact, do we make sure that we are able to access that talent And how do we make sure that we can smooth the path for the people who would come in order to be able to just contribute to science and engineering? The history of women in STEM is really a history of exclusion. And we might as well just realize that. We think about, the kind of trauma, as it were, that Rosalind Franklin dealt with on a daily basis, being surrounded by people who were not colleagues. They were basically competitors, and this cannot be good for you, all right? But this is kind of the history that is sitting out there. And I do think that the other kind of segue to Rachel is that the Johns Hopkins Medical School story is an interesting one. Johns Hopkins was founded, and the president wanted to start a medical school, and this was way back when, and but he needed the money in order to start it. And he was going around to different people with his tin cup out, and so when he got to the only people he found with money who might be interested in talking to him were 3 women heiresses in Baltimore. And they told him that, yes, they would give him the money under the condition that Hopkins basically be coeducational, the medical school, that it opened with the notion that women could go there, okay? So he left and went back, figured I could get the money without conditions someplace else, but he could not. So from its beginnings, Hopkins has in fact been open. Now that's not to say that women were basically flowing in large numbers at the beginning, but in fact there were no impediments in terms of the policies about putting them in. So this whole notion of how do you deal with exclusion, money is one way to deal with exclusion. And I heard yesterday about the stem cell issue and the fact that they are asking the questions about the data. Who is actually doing this work? Who is there in the departments, et cetera? So I want you to just hold on to those ideas. Hold on to the ideas that, in fact, you can move policy by the requirements and the criteria that you, in fact, put in place. So let's move from this history of exclusion to a history of intervention programs. We've always tried to work to bring people in, those of us from these different groups, but we've done it through a program over here, a program over there. I first participated in a conference in 1975, if you hear me, 1975, on women of color in STEM. Okay, it was called and the report from the conference is called The Double Bind. And if you read it, unfortunately, it reads way too fresh to be a document that is that old. 35 years later, my daughter and I collaborated on the Double Bind, The Next Generation, because she had had her own experiences by that time. And so this question of where are we? But in our case, the women who were there had all been involved in some kind of programs of intervention. Try to do a little of this and a little of that, a little of outreach and a little of bringing people in. But what we have discovered is that you can't keep this up. This does not move the needle, and it does not move the system, and it's exhausting for the people who are constantly doing interventions. So what you begin to realize, one of the speakers on yesterday talked about this initiative of If Then. If Then is a $25 million initiative of Lyda Hill, and I was so pleased to see that Lyda Hill, Philanthropies, basically is supporting this meeting as well. And I talked to Matt, and I said, I want to talk about If Then, because something like If Then is needed, because you've got to put the image, this different image of women into these fields in front of people in a very public and regular way. You've got to help people understand that STEM isn't something that's over here, just done in a lab, that there are people who are working on these issues and using these tools, these powerful tools, in just about every walk of life that you can imagine. And so you're not opting to become this strange, weird person. You remember the images that you saw on yesterday? The kind of Albert Einstein clone kinds of things. You're not opting to become this person. And in fact, what we've done at AAAS is that we work with Lida Hill Philanthropies to actually recruit and select the 125 ambassadors who come from all areas of STEM, that they come from 42 states, and they range in age from 17 to 61. And I said, I want grandmothers in this group, because people need to be able to see that folks have survived these pathways and that they are still here and functioning and making a difference. The other part is that we need to provide different images. And I was really struck. I loved Anne's presentation yesterday, and I told her, I said, you know, we've got to do a kind of a culture shift. We've got to provide different narratives, different images, so that the younger people who are around, and their parents and their other relatives and what have you, that they can see something different. And so these women received training, they all met together, the point is, we've got to show something different from what we generally see in order for people to really understand that women of all shapes, sizes, colors, etc., basically are doing this work, and it's okay, and it's great, and it's wonderful. And so this notion of changing the image, I am pleased, I'm thrilled that Lida Hill, who herself was a finished in mathematics when she graduated. And that's unusual for heiresses, okay, to want to pursue science and mathematics when you have lots of resources already, and you don't necessarily have to do this in order to make a living. You do it for the love. And so that was really important. One of the other things that we do at AAAS is that we manage the whole process for selection of the L'Oreal for Women in Science postdoctoral scholars. And a survey was actually done of the women who have been in this program over the 15 years. And I will tell you, the 80, whatever it is, women, but I will tell you the findings that I found that were absolutely critical. Number one, the women who came through this program, all of them are still in science. They have not stepped out, okay? When asked what was the one thing that made the most difference for them, it was having the money as a postdoc to be able to start one's independent life in science. That you were, in fact, not beholden to someone else in order to be able to follow your own pathway and your own ideas. And they felt that this was really the number one. Close behind it was being able to have family-friendly policies and being able to have a life and what have you. But the other thing that was most disturbing for me is that 100% of the women, and this includes women who are now full professors, 100% of the women indicated that at some point that they had had a large dose of imposter syndrome. No matter how capable they were, they had felt that they maybe didn't belong. And I think that there is something that is really, really bad, that it basically eats at your soul to the point where you don't know that, in fact, you are capable, you are good, you deserve whatever it is that you get. Now, there are barriers, but we can't keep going after the barriers in a way that does not change the structures. You can't just overlay something good on something that's rotten. And so we have begun to look much more structurally in terms of being able to do this. One of the things that we've looked at is that after the National Academy report came out on harassment, in fact, one of the things that we did, because there are recommendations to all different kinds of groups, to institutions, et cetera, but there are recommendations to the professional societies. And what we did as professional societies, with the leadership from the American Geophysical Union, AAAS, AAMC, Association of American Medical Colleges, and Education Council, who is a legal group, is that there's establishment of the Society's Consortium on Sexual Harassment in STEM. There are over 120 societies that are members. Now, what can we do as 120 societies? We can reset the standards. We can make sure that there are consequences to bad behavior. There are consequences. We can basically we've put in place in AAAS a structure to be able to remove someone as a fellow. The Academy has now put in place a structure to be able to indicate that people who are guilty of this and who are the serial predators who are out there, that there are consequences. And in fact, that looking at things like our meetings policy, how do we get rid of somebody in a meeting who is basically terrorizing other, beginning to reset, to renorm our fields. So this is the major direction, renorming. That diversity, equity, and inclusion are the normative kinds of structures, and that's where we're trying to go with this. Now, when we go to renorming, we've got to go at the universities. We already know these were not institutions that were built by women that was going to be supportive of women or other marginalized populations. Let's just be honest about that. So if you go in search of where there might be structures that have been put in place, one of the first things that you find is Athena Swan in the UK. And this was established by a group of women, prominent women scientists, who came together in the UK to put this structure in place. Now, it involves institutional commitment. It involves institutions undergoing a self-assessment around a scaffolding that ask about the policies, programs, procedures, and practices that are currently in place. And that, in fact, it involves review of all of these things. And it involves awarding a positive recognition to institutions that go through this process and begin to emerge and say that for us, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in this case, in the case of Athena Swan, gender equality, that this is something that is important to us, and this is something that we feel that institutions need to embrace. Now, Athena Swan has been in place for 15 years, almost 15 years. And there is another group that has been established. This is also in place in Ireland, and there's another group, SAGE, that is in place in Australia. And the Canadians have just announced that through Dimensions that they are putting this in place. In our case, we put this in place a couple of years ago in a pilot of something called sea change. Now, if you think about the phrase sea change, it really is to basically look for something that is different and disruptive, not more of the same, something that is different and disruptive. In our case, we see this as basically having three pillars. One is community. All those institutions that want to do better and want to look for cases and what have you. The interventions were not without purpose. We've learned a lot from them, but they are not good by themselves. Okay, the structures have to be looked at. So we develop a community, develop an institute, that is, help people learn how to do better. What does the research say? What do the case studies say? How do we, in fact, learn how to become worthy of being sea change goal? And then the award structure, which is, as I said, positive recognition for institutions that go down this road. The strategy is top down, bottom up. If you go to the organizational change literature, what you will find is you need leadership. You cannot, in fact, move forward without leaders who are committed to these issues. But we need culture change, and we need changes in climate at the department level. We need faculty to behave differently. I learned from Birmingham. I do not care about changing your heart and your mind. I do care about changing your behavior. And I think that those are the kinds of things that we get with the bottom-up kinds of processes. We are working with the disciplinary societies in order to put criteria in place that can pertain from the bottom-up level. Now, this is a complicated project. It is more complicated for us than for Athena Swan. Why? Number one, we aren't just looking at gender equality. We're looking at race ethnic at the same time, and we're looking at issues related to women of color, because we know that without specific focused attention on that, every data point that you can collect will indicate to you that we are at the bottom of every statistic that you want to look at. So we have an expanded view. Number two is that we have 3,000 institutions. The UK has nowhere near that many. And you think about the scale and the size of what it is that we are trying to do, we must be out of our minds. But this is like one of those when you have done everything else, you basically have to go for the thing that you haven't done. And the thing that we haven't done, we've talked a lot about systems change. We've talked a lot about transformation, but we've never put structures in place to actually make it happen. And so this is the effort to try to put structures in change to make it happen. The other thing that is different about Athena Swan is that because of the history of race in this country, we have a lot more barriers to the things that we can do. So my biggest expense is paying for lawyers, because we don't want to get in trouble and we don't want the institutions to get in trouble. There are whole sets of laws and judicial rulings that narrow the space that we can occupy in terms of moving these structures forward. So that's why my biggest expense is lawyers. But the point is that if we do nothing, we will stay in the same situation forever. So, like it or not, we're crazy enough to try to, in fact, move this forward. So, if we want to see change happen, what we're talking about is sea change, STEM equity achievement. It is crazy, it is ambitious, but we believe that it is a movement whose time has in fact come. Thank you.